Republican Rome is often thought to have been a period of political corruption and decadence, but this is not entirely true. There were many good and honest men who served Rome with honor and distinction during that period. One such man was our subject for today, Quintus Junius Rusticus. He was a Roman senator and a friend and follower of Thrasea, and like him an ardent admirer of Stoic philosophy. Let's get started. We know very little about Rusticus' life before he became consul in 97. What we do know comes from the writings of Pliny the Younger, who describes his family background. According to Pliny, Rusticus hailed from a family of modest means from the Italian countryside. His grandfather had risen to the rank of military tribune in the army, while his father was a successful prosecutor. So it seems that Rusticus came from a family with a tradition of public service. His family name, Junia, is believed to be derived from the gens Julia, which supposedly descended from the mythical ancestor of Rome itself. And yet, it is possible that they were related to the prominent Julian family, but if so, the connection has been lost to history. Although we know very little about Rusticus' early life, we do know that he studied rhetoric in Athens, and it was there that he met his friend and mentor. Thrasea was a wealthy senator who had traveled throughout Greece, collecting beautiful works of art and literature. He was also a patron of the arts, and it was through his patronage that the young Cicero received his education in Athens. Upon returning to Rome, Rusticus and his other friends began to emulate their mentor by hosting their own literary salons, where they discussed philosophy and literature with some of the greatest minds of the age. These included the philosophers Epicurus and Panaetius, as well as the poets Catullus and Cornelius. In 86, at the age of only 21, Rusticus married a woman named Aemilia Lepida, whose uncle Lucius Aemilius Paulus Macedonicus had defeated Perseus, the last king of Macedon, at the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC. This victory had secured the eastern provinces of the Roman Republic against any further Macedonian incursions and had firmly established Rome as the dominant power in the Mediterranean. The newlyweds would have been married by the famous Stoic philosopher and statesman Cato the Younger, who was also a close friend of Thrasea. Over the next decade, they would have two sons, Quintus Junius Rusticus and Lucius Junius. During this time, Rusticus held various minor offices until he was finally elected praetor in 83. It was at this point that Rusticus was able to start making a real difference. As praetor, he was responsible for organizing the Ludi Romani, or Roman Games, which were a series of festivals held in honor of the gods of Rome. Rusticus took his responsibilities seriously and organized the games with great fanfare. It was said that the spectacles he provided were so magnificent that they eclipsed even those of the previous consuls. For example, Rusticus hosted chariot races with prize money so generous that drivers who won the competitions became fabulously wealthy. He also introduced new and exciting events into the games, such as mock sea battles in the stadium. All of these festivities were meticulously planned and designed to appeal to the Roman public. Unfortunately, the outbreak of civil war between Octavian and Mark Antony interrupted Rusticus' tenure and forced him to abandon his province to defend Italy. Despite being appointed to command the fleet in the Sicilian Sea, Rusticus preferred to remain in Rome and wait for Octavian to conquer Sicily. Once peace was restored, Rusticus was able to return to his province and complete his term as Following his term as praetor, Rusticus spent several years traveling throughout the province, learning about the cultures and people of the East. This experience would prove invaluable when he was later appointed governor of Asia. As governor of Asia, Rusticus was responsible for one of the most important and powerful provinces in the entire empire. Asia Minor, or Asia as it was known to the Romans, was home to some of the most prosperous cities in the Roman world. Cities like Ephesus, Smyrna, and Pergamum were centers of trade and culture. They also contained some of the most impressive temples and monuments in the Roman world. However, despite its wealth and power, Asia was also a dangerous posting. The province was constantly threatened by invasions from neighboring kingdoms, and there were always factions within the cities that were eager to rebel against Roman rule. In addition, the Roman army was still occupying much of the province, and relations between the civilian population and the soldiers were often strained. Given all these challenges, it is all the more remarkable that Rusticus was able to make such an impact as governor. According to Pliny the Younger, Rusticus made every effort to improve the lives of the people under his rule. He reduced taxes and tariffs, and he also worked hard to promote trade and industry. In addition, Rusticus was very fair-minded and impartial. He did not allow himself to be swayed by the wealth or power of the rich and influential. Instead, he decided cases based on the evidence and the law. In addition to his administrative abilities, Rusticus was also a gifted orator and writer. He was particularly skilled at writing letters, and many of his surviving letters are masterpieces of Latin prose. In them, we see a man who is intelligent, witty, and full of common sense. We also see a man who is deeply concerned about the welfare of his fellow citizens. One of the most famous letters that Rusticus wrote was one in which he defended a widow and her children who were being evicted from their home because they could not pay their taxes. Rusticus argued that the tax collector had been unfair and unreasonable, and he demanded that the case be reopened. Another famous letter of his is one in which he berates a Roman knight for trying to bribe a magistrate. In this letter, Rusticus makes it clear that he will not tolerate corruption or injustice in his court. These letters are just a small sample of the many great things that Rusticus accomplished as governor of Asia. His record in office was so outstanding that when he returned to Rome, he was immediately made suffect consul. Rusticus had already made a name for himself as an honest and efficient administrator, and his appointment to the consulship was seen as a good omen for the future of the Roman Republic. Unfortunately, Rusticus' time as consul was cut short by the outbreak of civil war between Caesar Octavian and Mark Antony. Like many of his fellow senators, Rusticus sided with Octavian, who was ultimately victorious. However, despite his support for the winning side, Rusticus was not rewarded with any special favors. In fact, he was treated very harshly by Augustus, who was suspicious of him from the beginning. One of the first acts of Augustus was to take away Rusticus' province of Asia and give it to another senator, Gaius. In addition, Augustus refused to allow Rusticus to participate in any of the government's affairs. This was a clear indication that Augustus did not trust Rusticus, and that he wanted him as far away from power as possible. Not surprisingly, Rusticus spent the last years of his life in relative obscurity. He died in 44 BC, less than a year after the assassination of Julius Caesar, to whom he had been opposed. By this point, he had long since fallen out of favor with the ruling elite, and no one bothered to record the details of his death. In many ways, Rusticus was a tragic figure. He was a man of great ability and potential who never really got a chance to shine. If he had lived in another time, he might have gone down in history as one of the great statesmen of the Roman world. However, he was born at a time when the Roman Republic was being transformed into an empire, and there was no place for independent thinkers like him in the new order. Despite his tragic fate, Rusticus' life and career can teach us a lot about the values and ideals that should guide us in our own lives. Rusticus was a man who put duty and honor before personal gain. He was a man who was not afraid to speak out against injustice and corruption, and he was a man who dedicated his life to the service of others. In a time when political corruption and decadence were rampant, Rusticus was a shining light of honesty and integrity. He was a man who tried to make the world a better place, and in doing so, he set an example for us all. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and consider subscribing for more content. Thanks for watching.